It is 11. Got it. It is 11:30, and thank you, Dr. Harding, for the uplifting and innovative radical work that's being done, and in my opinion, should be reproduced globally. Again, I welcome you all to the Restorative Justice Community Healing and Indigenous Truth and Ethnic Studies Symposium. I am LeRita Cavness, and I will be your undergraduate research panel discussant. Today, we are being enlightened by the scholarship of 9 stellar human beings who are conducting research in various social justice directions. We will now get started with our very first panelist. The amazing Wendy Garcia is a graduating senior at the University of Wyoming. She's majoring in international studies with a minor in honors, Latina studies, and creative writing. So without further ado, take it away, Wendy.
Hello, thank you so much for introducing me. My name is Wendy Luna Garcia. I'm a graduating senior, majoring in international studies with minors in honors, Latino studies, and creative writing. And last year I applied to be a part of the McNair program and I was accepted. So in the summer I did a research internship, and my research was about how cinematic portrayals of Mexican womanhood affects Mexican women's perception of who they are, as well as their lived experience in society, and if that is expressed through the matriline, meaning through generations. And I used visual analysis and interviews with several women to ask them a variety of questions about their experiences watching popular films from Mexico's golden age of cinema, and if that in any way affected themselves and the way they viewed their mothers, their aunts, and other women in their family. And the results were that there were several themes that I gathered from my research, and those were beauty, gender roles, power, the star system, and the materialization of Mexicanness. And to explain 2 of these, the star system refers to the way that these women went to go see these films to see their favorite actress play this specific role. And in this way, when these women went to go see women that they looked up to, they mimicked the way that these women were representing various versions of womanhood. So that was a common theme that the participants noted. And lastly, the materialization of Mexicanness, to give more context to this, it means that these films were pretty much teaching Mexican women how to be Mexican through the way that they dressed, the way that they talked, the way that they just presented themselves in front of men, because Mexico's history is very much machista culture and very much male dominated, and still is. And when these films reproduced these roles and these perceptions of womanhood, they kept being reproduced in families and through generations. And my research pretty much just viewed films as cultural texts because they are reproducing the way that we think. And just to finalize my McNair research, I asked that film plays a very important role in society, and it is our responsibility to deconstruct these roles and to represent womanhood in more accurate ways that do not adhere to stereotypes and to archetypes that have been reproduced for centuries and decades. And this is just a little summary of my McNair research, and just a call to action. I think that films, as I said, do play a very important role, and in terms of of social justice, media, which is film, does have a very important role in the way that we view different ethnic groups and minorities in general. And then for my future research interests, I will be going to the University of Arizona in the fall for my master's degree in geography. And I want to study transboundary water governance and sanitation issues between the Mexican and Guatemalan border. and how that supports or hinders the constitutional guarantees to the human right to water and women's health, particularly Indigenous women's health. So I definitely did make a big shift in my research interests, but they align in several ways, and I'm very excited to learn and just continue this research that I'm really passionate about. And then lastly, the way that and the reason why I'm interested in this research is because I am Latina Indigenous, and I come from the Purepecha tribe in Michoacan, Mexico. And I just want to further explore how the water issues within this region heavily affects Indigenous women, and just other ways that we can support them and find solutions towards this issue that is not only present within this region, but globally. And that is all I have for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Your research is very necessary. We need to highlight what we are teaching our future generations and find out what is the best path forward. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, and I wish you luck in your next avenue of education. Our second panelist today is the incredible Elena Galdamez. She's a CU Denver undergraduate and a double major, majoring in political science and ethnic studies. She is really interested in learning about different identities and how people's identities can serve as defining factors for them. So let's take it away, Elena.
Hello, thank you. As LeRita said, I'm Elena. I'm double majoring in political science and ethnic studies. I'm currently a junior, and it wasn't really until college where I guess you could say I accepted my identity. So I'm Central American. Both of my parents are from El Salvador, and really wasn't until I was a freshman in college where I started saying that I wanted to not make a change, but become more curious about what exactly is being done for these different Central American identities, especially actually Indigenous and Black. There's little to almost no research or data really on Indigenous Central Americans, Afro Central Americans. But because my parents are from El Salvador, I mostly focus on like Indigenous Salvadorans or Afro Salvadorans. So last semester when I took research methods with Professor Faye, I did my research design proposal on a pretty similar topic to Wendy's actually, which is on focusing on the misconceptions and the inaccurate representations of Latinos and their individualities and their overall like characteristics in media, mostly focusing on films, but just general media like books, any type of literature, research articles, films, TV shows. And most of it is also because I grew up being told I wasn't who I was. So growing up in elementary school, I would always be corrected for my own identity. So I started identifying as something I wasn't. There's also this unfortunate, I guess you could say, conflict between Central Americans and Mexico, and Mexican hegemony is a big thing in Central America, or between Central Americans and Mexicans. And unfortunately, there's this belief and superiority between both identities or all identities that add to the conflict. So I've really been interested in focusing my research on seeing how these inaccurate representations add to that. I'm not going to share my slideshow, but just to talk a little bit about it, the reasonings behind my question, which is in different types of media focused on enhancing individual identities, how prevalent is the representation of Latinos or Latinx, and how accurate are those depictions? Besides like my own personal view, I think it's really important to realize how a variety of representation is important. And it can also show, the variety of embracement of seeing individual perceptions and representations. So to gather that information, I haven't started, of course, but to do that, my research methods would mostly take a qualitative approach. I believe that would help me understand more better the experiences, beliefs, and concepts of the people. It would help me analyze and continue gaining knowledge of a specific culture and the context behind it. And it would help me understand new ideas that correlate with the topic. And to do that, I would do that through a different set of things. So for example, I would use focus groups. I would also conduct interviews or any type of oral history. And I would also do surveys, polls, and questionnaires related to not necessarily numerical data, but for different perspectives on how people feel about either their identity or how they feel about the accuracy or inaccuracy of the representation in the media. The reasoning behind that is because with qualitative approach, I believe adjustments can be made based on the research process. That would also help me ask individuals for their experience and things, and that would add on to the new knowledge I would gain. So for example, with focus groups, I believe those would help me gather research because the individuals in the focus group are only a small representation of the population. They wouldn't be able to, represent everyone, of course. So I think focus groups would help me gain different insights and perspectives. And that would help me provide different insights for what I'm trying to get. We would have like a discussion based on a defined topic. In this case, it would be the depictions of identities in the media. Considering how these allow the designer to delve deeper into a topic or issue, I also think it would give freedom to the people being in the focus group or even in interviews, and how they would maybe feel like they could be more expressive in terms of giving me their opinion on the topic or anything. In terms of existing research and data, most of the data I have found is actually just data that I read in the course I took last semester. A lot of the articles were about, like stereotypes, how Latinos were casted in stereotypical roles in medias. For example, you have like housekeepers or house cleaners, nannies, things like that. But I do have a friend, he's a grad student right now, and he is working on his thesis, and he's focusing on a similar topic, which is about the Salvadoran identity. And he told me that he's been slowly but surely collecting a lot of research. So he told me he'd be able to give some of that to me, like the articles and other books he's read. So hopefully I could get behind that soon. But yeah, and then for the methods of the data collection, I would also use, I would use different methods to separate the data-based interviews and focus groups, polls, surveys, because I think that even though they're from a similar approach, they would still give me different data. So even though I wouldn't really take a quantitative approach, I think there's still ways to do methods to lead to that. But yeah, in conclusion, I think this would help me and others to gain a deeper understanding of different identities, become more aware of different experiences individuals face, and also learn how to express bias and face it, because even me, I'm still, learning about like implicit bias, unconscious bias, and just trying to not have a bias. It's been a hard journey, but it wasn't really till college where I started learning about identities and different cultural histories. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, and hopefully by next semester I'll have more research for this.
Well, thank you so much, Elena. We passively consume media, and thank you for bringing it to our attention. the inaccuracy of many of the disseminated personas. And thank you for your continued efforts in uplifting the voices of marginalized communities, because this is a very necessary action that more individuals need to get into. So thank you for your research. Next up, we have the awesome Courtney Crowley. Cowling, sorry. Courtney Calming is a women's and ethnic studies major at CU Colorado Springs. They are interested in exploring the complex ways that systems validate and encourage harm. So without further ado, please welcome Courtney.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, my name is Courtney Calming. I use they, them pronouns. And the work I am sharing today is titled Safety for Some, Death for Others, Trans Necropolitics and Homo Nationalism. So this is work that I have conducted under Dr. Trey Wentling for our West Methods and Capstone class. During my time in undergrad, I have participated a lot in research, but as a non-binary individual, I have often felt excluded, misrepresented, and just discarded in research. This feels very violent to my person, but also it has violent consequences. So I was really interested in exploring the role of violence in our society, and also just increasing scholarly work around trans individuals. So my research questions were, how does the state control and manage the trans population? And also, where does targeted violence come from and what purpose does it serve? So currently I'm working on a literature review of 12 different scholarly articles, and it's from a whole bunch of different fields. For example, I have stuff in there from gender studies, philosophy, anthropology, sociology, communication, and trans studies. So to do this, I first worked on an annotated bibliography where I chose a couple of articles to kind of start my research. And then I just paid attention to who the authors were talking to and what they were talking about. And then I sought out those articles to kind of fill in for my other articles. So to begin, I started looking at Mbembe's term necropolitics, and he uses it as a theory to describe how the people exert power over undesirable populations through the employment of death. And this death can be social, literal, or political death. And social identities are what determine the desirability of populations, which includes class, gender, racialized identities, ethnicity, sexuality. So individuals and populations who do not conform to hegemonic identities are punished, and death is utilized to promote the more hegemonic identities. And additionally, Hetwarn looked at the concept of necropolitics, but less as a theory and more as a tool to kind of understand what the politics are behind death. And gender is an important aspect of necropolitics because death is employed to harm individuals who do not meet dominant gender norms. So trans individuals fit underneath this because they inherently do not meet this dominant expectation of themselves. However, there is difference in this. So like a trans individual who does ascribe to gender norms and presents how people would expect them to present on their perceived assumptions about the person is going to face different consequences under this system compared to trans individuals who are non-conforming. But then Azura pushes this thought process further with a trans of color critique and promotes the analysis of the intersections of techniques of domination rather than focusing on the sole identities of an individual. So a cisgender individual could be harmed under this system if they do not ascribe to gender standards, because it's less about the identity of either like cisgender or transgender, and it's more about the enforcement of the gender standards. So another reading I looked at was Clarkson, and Clarkson stated that this necropolitical violence is reproduced in relation to gender in settler nationalist frameworks. And he argues this is because trans individuals are perceived as terrorists to the gender binary. And this leads to a perceived deceptiveness, criminality, concealment within transgender populations, which then leads to the thought that trans people are terrorists of the nation state. And Clarkson also found that this was reproduced in lesbian circles that ascribe to nationalist frameworks, which is an example of homonationalism. And this term was coined by Poir to describe how the employment of nationalist ideology in LGBT circles. So we see marginalized individuals who are pushed towards death, trying to make claims of safety and protection, but they are doing this in the same systems that are reproducing this violence. So an example of this would be hate crime legislation, which normalizes and naturalizes necropolitics. But it is important to pay attention to who benefits from these laws and these kind of neoliberal practices. And those are the individuals who are able to perform whiteness and patriotism and gender roles. So although some individuals may have safety, it's very important to pay attention to who those individuals are and also who is getting pushed towards death in that practice. Overall, it is important to understand the state's role in violence and how they promote the hegemonic standards and how they target undesirable populations, because without an understanding of this, we will not be able to resist it, and we might actually fall victim to reproducing it in our own circles. So in order to advocate effectively, it is very important to pay attention to the role of death in our society. I highly recommend for further reading Sarah Lamble's Queer Investments in Punitiveness. She talks about this, and it's a great kind of a more entry level to the problems behind these seemingly progressive movements, such as like hate crime legislation. And just overall, we need to be critical in the ways that we advocate for ourselves, so we are careful not to harm others in the process.
Well, thank you very much, Courtney, for giving voice to the underrepresented trans community. The political ramifications of intersectionality, of the acceptance of, discrimination towards, or erasure of must be acknowledged. Thank you for elevating and acknowledging these harms that are occurring in these communities. Next, our next panelist is the wonderful Irena Amazu. She is a women's studies and ethnic studies major at CU Colorado Springs. They are passionate about social justice, activism, and finds the time to pursue poetry of all things. So let's give a warm welcome to Irena.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is Irena Amazu, and I'm an undergraduate at the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs, studying women's and ethnic studies. And last summer, I was awarded the Undergraduate Research Academy grant, which I worked on with Dr. Wentling as my faculty advisor. And I'm continuing that right now within my capstone class. In my research, BBC, Blackness, BDSM, and Community is a play on the more colloquial term of BBC, which means big black cock, which is a marker specifically in the hypersexualization and objectification of Black men. These imaginations of Black bodies and people, however, are concerned with whiteness. And this research really pushes back on the passivity of Black people within sexual spaces and pushes first-person narratives, creating an autonomy that does not exist within the category of Big Black Hawk. I personally am Black identifying and a BDSM practitioner, so I do have a vested interest in Black voices within BDSM spaces. Sexuality research has a long history of centering the narratives of white people within the heteropatriarchy. And this research broadly investigates Black people's sexual experiences, specifically with bondage, domination, and sadomasochism, which is also known as BDSM. And BDSM spaces resist notions of normative sexual practices and can be spaces for the queering of sex and a resistance to dominant notions about bodies. And so I build on academics such as Ariane Cruz, Catherine Martinez, and Elizabeth Sheff, and Cozy Hammers. So my research is really constructed through critical race theory, and I conducted my interviews using feminist methodology like grounded theory. Ariane Cruz, in A Juncture of BDSM and Race, takes Blackness not as periphery to BDSM, but as an essential part of it, while simultaneously addressing the gap in sex research, which in of itself is an effect of racism. So I really want to explore how the racialization process polices bodies in sexual spaces, and how and why Black BDSM practitioners engage in pleasurable, sensual, and sexual activity in a structurally racist America. Using a snowball method, I reached out to sex-centric Instagram accounts and Facebook groups, as well as interacting with users on the dating site field, and many emails to sex educators across the country. I reached out to 11 prominent sex-centric Instagram accounts and to 8 sexologists and educators across the country, and recruited folks through flyers at the Kickball in Denver, and created a field dating account for my study. Through this, I completed 10 semi-structured qualitative interviews with self-identified Black BDSM practitioners across the US. And these practitioners, they really range from like Vermont to California, New York, South Carolina. It was a really great swath of folks from across the US. And 6 were self-identified as cis men, and 4 self-identified 6 identified as cis women, and 4 self-identified as cis men. And they're like around the range of 23 to 38 years old. I had 3 primary findings, and I'll just bullet point those for you real quick. So the body of Black identified person is in constant contact with historical, social, and political forces. Gender is essential to the experience of racialization in BDSM spaces, and most participants felt like they were not included in BDSM communities. And if you'd like more information on this, you can email me, and I'll put my email in the chat for you all. And overall, I did have limitations to my study though, because one of the biggest was because I use a snowball method. All of my participants were in the similar brackets of education. Many of them were sexologists themselves or educators within the space. And so that meant that I got a certain group of Black people who are willing to speak on their BDSM experiences. And that should be noted, especially when we're talking about socioeconomic background. And also on gender lines, I also did not have any participants that were not cis-identifying, which I think would be a great opportunity within the future. I also did not specifically focus on ability, which I also think would be really amazing, and also another opportunity to look at within the BDSM community. And it's valuable to have Black people's experiences of sex and sex research. The lack of focused Black narratives is an effect of a racist system. And BDSM as a focus and a space is not exempt. And one cannot assume the discourse centered on whiteness applies to all people all of the time. And we have to give justice to the stories of the most marginalized. Thank you all so much for having me here.
Thank you, Irena, for your research. When will we make space for all of our inclusive races, genders, and varied sexual orientations? I want to thank you for giving voice to this frequently silenced and frequently tabooed topic, because we need to start talking about what really goes on in life. So thank you, Irena. Next, our next panelist is the remarkable Chloe Cross. She's a senior student of Women's Studies and Ethnic Studies at CU Colorado Springs. Her research seeks to expand perspectives beyond white and heteropatriarchal perspectives. So without further ado, let us welcome Chloe.
Hi, thank you so much for having me and for all being here. I'm very glad to share my recent research with you all today. As stated, my name is Chloe Cross, and I am a student of Women's and Ethnic Studies at UCCS. I am a graduating senior, and I initially started as a media studies major, which is part of why much of my work is influenced and inspired by pop culture media analysis. Positioning myself as a Black lesbian woman and as a proud pop music enthusiast, I hope to share something new with you today that ties engagement with certain media to safety and community building opportunities. My working title for this project is Lovesick Gal Pals, K-pop girl groups through a Black lesbian feminist lens, a play on lyrics by a popular music group that I will speak more about. My research questions for this project came originally out of lesbian social circles, observations of social media, and conversations with my partner about the ever-growing popularity of K-pop music. Specifically, my lesbian friends kept recommending I check out the girl group Blackpink, and I already had preliminary questions from that point. Are they gay? Do they sing about gay things? And why do fellow lesbians keep recommending this music group to me? Through the content that I observed in order to learn more about this group, I did not immediately notice anything explicitly referencing homosexuality or anything of the sort. So I became extremely interested in why a certain demographic that I was a part of continued recommending this media to me. I noticed a theme among the fans and the content that they produce, and I sought to investigate that more. But before getting into my research and findings, I wanted to define some terms. So if K-pop is unfamiliar to you, it refers to primarily South Korean produced popular media. In the context of this particular research project, that would be music and related content like music videos, live performances, and marketing content materials. And girl groups are groups comprised of female music artists who perform within the K-pop genre, and the training for their groups can begin as young as elementary school age under the tutelage of management companies. The performers are often referred to as idols, so fans of K-pop will post videos of their favorite idol, and that includes fandom behavior. So fandom would be the overarching group of people who engage passionately with this media, as well as the spaces in which they do that. An example of K-pop media fans' ability would be the presence of these fan cam or focused fan videos underneath unrelated social media posts. So if you've ever been on Twitter and seen a video of someone dancing to music and you're like, who is this? Maybe it was a K-pop fan cam. They like to promote their favorite idol in this way, and something about the fan engagement was very fascinating to me. So I sought to investigate this more, and also found that the fans' impact was so passionate and pivotal that television channels in Iran actually started including Korean media because people at elementary, middle, and high schools were talking so much about K-dramas. I spent a lot of time researching and observing fan activities on social media sites like Twitter and YouTube. And since lesbian discussions on social media and in person sparked my initial interest in this topic, for the purpose of my research, I focused mainly on lesbians, and I use that to describe people who self-identify that way, as well as sapphic individuals to encapsulate others of marginalized sexual identities who are perceived socially as women or female. My actual research questions that I ended up settling on were, why do lesbians love K-pop girl groups so much? And what is the benefit of participating in fan culture surrounding these artists and their content? It felt important to me because the growth of K-pop's popularity holds larger political and economic implications for South Korea, in addition to the niche impacts on marginalized groups resulting from global reach due to social media primarily, as well as things like a Netflix documentary that is currently available on Blackpink that came out in 2020. Using a Black feminist perspective inspired by Patricia Hill Collins's writings on transnational Black feminism and connections to Kimberly Crenshaw's definition of intersectionality, I sought to untangle lesbian conceptualizations of K-pop from the observably heteropatriarchal or male-gazy K-pop genre, while keeping in mind the racial and political implications of the genre's origin and export style. I looked at South Korean history and gender politics, history and critiques of the K-pop industry, social media research pertaining to youths and minorities, including women, LGBT+ individuals, and races across geographic locations, and focused literature surrounding K-pop gender and sexuality. Throughout these literatures, I found themes of community building and safety emerging among people of lesbian experience when engaging with K-pop, especially girl groups, and that was the most prominent pair of themes that I found throughout this literature. However, I also noticed observations of paradoxical marketing resulting in potentially lesbian-coded media that simultaneously appeals on a surface level to heteropatriarchal ideals. And that was a pattern that emerged when looking not only at the media itself, but the existing critiques. In conclusion, I look forward to continuing my investigation of the connections between gender, sexuality, and K-pop, while focusing on the experiences and interactions of lesbians specifically and other sapphic identifying individuals who are passionate about K-pop girl groups. I'm currently working toward a literature review at the moment, but I hope to expand this research beyond graduation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chloe. And I'm like, wow, we do get trapped by our community feedback loops. Fan culture is political, regardless if we want to choose to recognize that as fact or not. I want to thank you again for reminding me to consider what media and what community feedback loops that I am consuming. And I hope everyone else thinks about that also. So as we move on, our next panelist is the outstanding Alyssa Haley. She's a junior majoring in ethnic studies at CU Denver. They are passionate about getting involved in their communities, especially those of the LGBTQIA+ and sex work communities. They are one of tomorrow's radical advocates for positive change. Please welcome Alyssa.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Alyssa Haley. I'm a junior and I use she, they pronouns. I am presenting essentially a position paper for my race, religion, and belonging class with Katie Mormon. And we've been discussing and exploring race as a social construct in that class. So racism is a convoluted subject. As much as some people may like to disagree, racism remains prevalent in our society and has for centuries. However, historians disagree on the exact time period that the concept of race or racism was introduced into our society. So one scholar, Dr. Benita Seth, she argues that race is a modern concept and did not come into existence until the 19th century. Dr. Maria Elena Martinez posits, however, that the concept of race existed well before, all the way back to the 16th century, and I will be arguing for the latter. So Dr. Benita Seth's argument is based upon the fact that the human body was not an immutable, fixed entity, but one that was recognized as pliable and malleable to human agency prior to the 19th century. She references T.R. Malthus's an essay on the principle of population, which brings forth the argument that the human body is a fixed object. This new understanding of the human body allowed for the categorization of race and gender, and in turn, scientific racism. Because prior generations had a less developed understanding of biology, they did not have the methods to racially classify human bodies. Set states, for the polygenists, race was not a feature of God's will. It was an irreversible, biologically fixed, and scientifically measurable expression of human diversity. Scientists today, however, recognize that race is a social construct rather than something founded in biology. Dr. Maria Elena Martinez examines Spain's concept of limpieza de sangre, purity of blood, and raza, race, during the 16th century. As Martinez states, used mainly to designate a set of persons, animals, or plants connected by common descent or origin, the word race was part of a conceptual scheme in which the distinctive characteristics were explained genealogically by showing where they belonged in God's creation. Although the methods varied, this definition bears similarities to that of ethnology, as a science which investigates the mental and physical differences of mankind, which led to the scientific realm's need to classify racial differences on the basis of complexion, hair, eyes, face, skull, all that. So as the concepts of secularism and science were becoming popularized, racism needed only to be defended and defined in new terms. During the end of the 15th century, statutes of limpieza de sangre began to slowly spread throughout Spain. These statutes denied heretics, recent converts, and their descendants entry to certain countries, universities, and military orders. Due to their understanding of biology, policies regarding heretics and their descendants were all based on the belief that people who deviated from church dogma were likely to infect the family members, with purity became a standard for a variety of Spanish institutions. Religious rhetoric, both from biblical sources and religious authors, cemented these religious and racial ideologies. According to Martinez, certain communities were believed to derive from different biblical ancestors, and thus some were thought to have more privileged lineages than others. In order for said lineages to maintain their privilege, interracial or intercaste relationships were dissuaded. As a result of this racist dogma, interracial marriage continued to be illegal in many regions, including the United States, until 1967. So in relation to the sanctions against intercaste and interreligious marriage, Seth cites that the thesis that collapses caste membership with racial identity. So through this theory, caste can then be understood as racist. As Martinez states, the sistema de castas, or sistema de razas, as it could be argued, had become established well before the 19th century. Mexico City's Secretario Metropolitano started to keep separate baptismal records for the castas in 1603. The categories of Negro, Mulatto, and Mestizo were already put in place. These racial identities were accompanied by the denial of freedoms. For example, by the 1570s, some cathedral chapters had constitutions that made Mestizo priests ineligible for ecclesiastical posts and benefices. Anxieties arose around the similarities between Native religious practices and those of the Jewish faith, causing Native peoples to be characterized as idolaters and heretics. According to the Mexican inquisitors, there was persuasive evidence linking the two populations, such as similarities between Hebrew words and indigenous ones, and their likeness in habits, rituals, sacrifice, dress, blankets, and long hair. As is evidence, racialization does not occur solely on the physical body. Africans in Spanish America were violently oppressed as well. Although Spain eventually concluded that they could no longer afford to enslave Native peoples, they continued to use African slaves due to the growing European perception of Africa as a land of infidels and barbarians. This was partially thanks to racial scientific theories. Native people were seen as weak and feminine due to their physical and cultural characteristics. African people, on the other hand, were thought to be 3 or 4 times stronger than an Indian. Scientific observations on the physical body supported racism, specifically the notion of racial slavery, well before Seth's proposed period. As the Christianization of Africans was becoming a less viable defense for emancipation, in 1667, a legal suit compelled the Virginia Legislative Assembly to craft a law stipulating that Christian freedom was purely spiritual and had no bearing whatsoever on the physical bonds of chattel slavery. Oppression, exploitation, and discrimination were no longer based on religious ideals. Powers of authority across the globe recognized and acted on race from the 16th century and beyond. Although race was not officially studied or measured before the 19th century, race as a concept was acknowledged by those in power and those abused by it. In some ways, arguing that race did not exist prior to racial science justifies scientific racism in itself. As Martinez concludes, the claim that race can be used only to describe modern phenomena is problematic because it rests on the belief that there is a single transhistorical racism, and because it is frequently based on the assumption that the notion is operating only when it deploys biological notions of difference. As is shown throughout this representation in the history of European colonization, the process of racialization depends on factors such as religion, language, geography, and customs. Denying the long history of race and its implications denies the livelihoods of people of color around the world. In order to understand racism in its entirety, one must recognize its origins and transformations. And we can see examples of this process of racialization today through Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. Thank you.
That is amazing, daunting, and important work that you are doing. When will we be able to accept and respect all, regardless of intersection, as fully human, and stop using religion to oppress and discriminate others, or even considering that there is an other? I hope we as a society can begin to do better. Thank you very much for your research. Our next panelist is the innovative Jeremiah Richard, a junior at CU Denver, majoring in ethnic studies and music production. He's passionate about affecting change across industry and breaking down barriers for marginalized communities. Please join me in welcoming Jeremiah.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So my research, I've titled it The New White Man, because I'm a musician, I gotta have that little flair, it sounds kind of nice. But I'm looking at Black masculinity through an intersectional feminist lens. This is a project that I'm doing in my Women of Color Feminisms class with Dr. Katie Mormon. So I'm looking at Black masculinity under the pretense that it's constructed to insert Black men as the beneficiaries of the systems of domination that are already in place in the United States white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal landscape by focusing on domination and proximity to the ideal, and the ideal being cishet white men. Specifically, the question that I'm trying to answer is, what are the underlying oppressions and traumas leading to the rhetoric and ideology of harmful Black masculinity towards Black women and women in general? So the things that I was kind of looking for was, I would look at Black men in media, primarily social media, podcasts, interviews, research projects, things like that. Not so much the mass media, because I feel like the smaller media sources provide a better variety of Black men to kind of listen to and analyze. And I would analyze the rhetoric and the words that they're saying for symptoms of those systems of domination, or as trauma responses. And then I'm using understandings and knowledge from different ethnic scholars and activist leaders such as Bell Hooks, Angela Davis, Ron Ironman, Malcolm X, Maria Lugones, to name a few, to understand the origins of these things, of these phrases. One of the two things that I'm assuming going into this research is that domination is not inherently an aspect of Black masculinity. Bell Hooks talks about in one of her books that Africans landed in the Americas before Columbus did, but the reason they didn't affect the landscape in the same way is because domination was not, domination and subjugation of the native populations was not something that was a part of their masculinity. Domination was an aspect of white masculinity, of Eurocentric masculinity, that was a learned behavior during and post-slavery. The other aspect that I'm assuming to be true is that Black men have had to exaggerate their masculinity to compensate for the hundreds of years of emasculation and violence perpetrated against them. An example of some of the rhetoric that I was analyzing is, if anybody listens to podcasts or on TikTok, you might have heard one guy say something along the lines of, "I think it's cheating for my girlfriend to have an Instagram account," which when I heard it, I was like, that's kind of abrasive, but go off. And then they also say things like Black women are not submissive enough to be married to, or things like that. And in analyzing this rhetoric, a lot of it came back to coloniality of gender, and this idea that Black women are the antithesis of white men, and Black men would try to distance themselves from Black women in order to be closer to the ideal. And this would allow them to then in the future benefit from these systems of domination, such as racism, sexism, capitalism, neoliberalism, things like that. We also see a lot of perversion of theory in the flesh, in that these hyper masculine Black men disregard women's experiences as well as their own experiences in service of a more neoliberalist ideology, and that, you know, the only reason that you're like this is because, you know, it's your fault. It's not the system surrounding it. We also see a lot of perpetuation of very controlling images about Black women. They would say things like, you know, the Starkeisha, or, you know, the ghetto Black woman. They're just too this, the other thing. Even in some of these interviews, they would these Black men would be asked explicitly, what type of women are you attracted to? And they would go out of their way to attack Black women, not even giving the things that they are looking for to things that they're not. The goals that I had for this research is to unlearn some of the harmful behavior and ideations that I may have participated in, because I am a Black man, I'm biracial, but I'm Black and white. And it's to kind of unlearn things that I've done knowingly or otherwise, and to help others potentially do the same. But in the greater scheme of things, I want to better understand some of the trauma that is currently dividing the Black community, and the evolution and creation of a Black identity that promotes healing and positivity and exists beyond this idea that being Black is being ghetto, or being Black is being poor. There's a lot more culture around being Black, and I wanted to kind of get at the roots of that. In the future, I want to expand this research to include more nationalities, races, and genders, because I've seen parallels between the white feminist movement, mainstream movement, and their proximity to the ideal. I've seen similarities in like Cubans in Florida, and I want to kind of expand this to look at all the systems of domination and how it's working. But yeah, I thank you guys for having me on here. Appreciate you.
That is awesome, Jeremiah. Thank you for giving voice to the toxic personas that are being discoursed in America. And thank you for providing us the opportunity to recognize these false narratives, and also providing a framework for us to begin to recognize how we are participating in perpetuating these false discourses and improper frameworks. So kudos. Our next astonishing panelist is Leanne Fremont. She's completing a double major at CU Colorado Springs. She will ultimately open a water birthing cooperative that provides natural birthing options and comprehensive care to women of all races. And yes, I did put out there that she's going to do this, even though this is one of her dreams, because we are going to send her vibes to get this done. This is something that's necessary. So without further ado, please welcome Leanne.
Thank you, LeRita, and everyone. Again, my research is geared towards the medical community and medical professionals, specifically those who are delivering babies. And it's designed to inform and persuade those providers to be racially aware and responsible for the power dynamics that may be intimidating or threatening to the Black people they serve. In this research, I've endeavored to answer 3 questions. 1, what are the root causes of systemic racism in healthcare? 2, in what ways are medical providers' biases towards Black people diminishing the quality of care that they're able to provide during pregnancy and delivery? And 3, what are the experiences of Black people when receiving healthcare in the United States, specifically for maternity care and childbirth? So racialized birth experiences is the title of my paper, although this should not be the norm in the United States. The World Health Organization has placed a high priority on addressing birth disparities since 2010. And now, over 10 years later, there have been no real changes reported. Black people have suffered medically in the United States for far too long. And many researchers, as well as myself, believe that they deserve equitable treatment and comparable childbirth outcomes to their white counterparts. We know that there are no inherently biological reasons for the twofold higher risk of Black people having a preterm birth over white women. Preterm birth is the leading cause for health issues over the lifetime of a person. In addition, global health experts agree that how people are treated during childbirth can affect the health and well-being of mother, child, and family. It's the experiences of these Black people that I'm taking a closer look at in my research to find out exactly what they're experiencing that sets them up for these negative birth outcomes. Black people are reporting that they're being mistreated by their providers with not only verbal abuse, but the withholding of information, blaming, issues of mistrust, miscommunication, and the list goes on. So these are the types of racialized stressors that Black people are experiencing over their lifetime that create an allostatic load that's carried with them into their maternity care. So these ongoing repetitive racial experiences take a toll on the health of Black people, which results in health changes such as high blood pressure. Racial concerns build as Black people are preparing to bring a helpless baby into a dangerous world, adding more stress and new health issues. The questions then are, how do we address implicit bias with medical providers who are being trained to assess race and ethnicity in the context of clinical interactions? What's missing in the teaching of medical students as they learn to identify how their patients' demographic and cultural factors influence their health behaviors? What needs to be addressed differently as interns and residents receive cultural competency training? These are the questions that medical professionals are asking themselves. But no one's addressing the larger and intersectional issues of structural and institutional racism, where the issues of race, politics, and medical knowledge intersect with a long-standing history of white privilege. These are the subtle and less identifiable issues that are eroding the medical care delivered to Black people. Researchers are now pointing to the need to acknowledge the past, bringing truth for healing. As a women's and ethnic studies major, who is also gaining my bachelor's in nursing, I want to be able to address these issues and see them eradicated in my future. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Leanne. Thank you for highlighting the systemic oppression that's occurring in American prenatal treatment and the differential treatment that is occurring during the birthing process. Implicit bias is frequently ignored, and I personally am thankful that you are advocating for our precious Black babies to come into this world in a safe manner. So thank you for that. And thank you for your research, and good luck on your clinic. It's coming. Next up, we have our second Chloe, the extraordinary Chloe Frazee. Chloe is a UC Denver scholar of criminal justice, pursuing a minor in ethnic studies. She looks forward to serving as an amazing K-12 educator very soon. So let us welcome Chloe.
Actually, LeRita, Chloe couldn't make it today. Something came up. So I think we can go to our discussion, question and answer session now.
We do have one more panelist on the roster. We do not want to forget anyone. We have the incredible Hope Hernandez, a scholar at CU Denver. Hope is developing her skill set to become a stronger and more innovative agent of social change. So if we have her on the line, can we please welcome Hope?
She also had to drop out at the last minute.
Okay.
Apologize for that.
That is no problem. I don't know if you have begun to enter your questions in the chat, but let's open up the discussion to questions and answers for all of our wonderful panelists today. Marissa?
Yeah, I can start. Thank you. This is phenomenal. Every single panelist and every single subject. And we can only imagine that there is even more topics and to cover and more research to do. And my question to all of you here is, I'm a first year ethnic studies student, and I'm also a single mom and full-time worker. So it's not that much time that I can devote for work, but first of all, I recognize how important this work is and this research and the studies. So my question to all of you, since you are undergrad just like me, or grads, what is your advice for people who are entering academia? We are at this, very first steps. We are where you have been, a year or a couple of years ago. What's your advice to success? Because I have tons of ideas, and but I know that I'm limited in time. So prioritizing, or what's your advice to all of us at the initial stages of our education, exploration, work, and the change that we want to do? And thank you again.
I could talk about that. One of the things that I learned when I first got into the ethnic studies programs is that it can be very overwhelming very fast, because we all have all these ideas and projects and problems that we want to solve. And for me, it was taking it slow and trying to just go in with an open mind and just try to learn as much as I could, and then find the paths that I just naturally gravitated more towards. And it allowed me to kind of see a focus towards the end of my degree that allowed me to be a little bit more focused and to be a little bit more driven. Because I don't understand the aspect of being a mother. That's something that I don't understand. But I do understand working full time while I go into school, and it's a lot. And if you just take it slow, take it one step at a class, and try not to let the gravity of some of the overarching issues in the world get to you, because we're studying very, very real problems that will take potentially generations to solve, and it helps to try to find the one aspect of ethnic studies or gender studies that you gravitate towards and kind of lean in on that a little bit, and to talk to people in your classes. I've made so many friends in my ethnic and gender studies classes, and just being able to just talk about these issues and be like, okay, well, what can we do about this? Well, a lot of times it just feels good to know that other people feel the same way that you do about these problems, or understand kind of the weight of these issues. But I would just say, take it slow. Don't feel like you have to save everyone or try to change the world in one day, because it takes a community like the one that we're trying to build today to do that.
Thank you.
I absolutely agree that taking it one step at a time is very necessary. We have a question from Raquel.
I was actually just thinking of responding to what Marcia was asking as a mom. And I was just going to say, you can definitely be a graduate student and be a mom. And so if that's something that you're considering, I would just say, yeah, always pace yourself. And just, even, how can I put it? Like you don't have to separate them, I guess. You don't have to put your mothering to the side of your academic studies. You can merge them, you can fuse them. And, even just making your children visible is, I think, a big, really radical work that you can do. It's challenging to be a mom in grad school, but it can be really rewarding to you and your kids. It sets a great example for your kids too.
Thank you. Yeah. You are also inspiring.
I just wanted to add on real quick on that question. I don't know what it's like to be a mother, but when we're in this kind of space, academic space, we often learn about ourselves. And so we come in contact academically with our own oppressions all the time. And I think that's makes studying ethnic studies or even women's ethnic studies so difficult, not just because of the work like that we have to do, but of like our own embodied experiences that come into contact with the work. I've cried in many a class. And so part of that is also leaning on the people around you who are going through it with you, because it's not like you have the stress of academics in general, like just going to college with all the other stuff about the world, and that's difficult enough, but then you also have your own self, like your own body. And so what I can say is like community and your professors and your classmates and the people in your program in general. I think that is the best way in which we can survive this capitalist hellscape that has created academia. So yeah, that's my advice.
Thank you. This is awesome.
I think I just need to echo that sentiment right there, because self-care is one of the most important things that you will need to do as a mother. Your children need you to advance. Your education is helping you to do that. And you must be there for both of those moments. So take space for you no matter what, over everything. Make sure you take space for you daily to love you, because it will help you love them better. Arturo, sorry.
Yeah. Hola, I'm Arturo Aldama. I'm the chair of the Department of Ethnic Studies. I just wanted to verbalize the comments I put in the chat. I'm just beyond blown away by the really amazing cutting edge. I just feel like, I got my PhD in ethnic studies in Berkeley in the very, very late 90s. And I feel like the work that you're doing is just so cutting edge, and it's like the next wave of the production of knowledge. And what I really, really appreciate is your commitment to kind of true intersectional epistemic, inquiry. And that's really, it's just really, really exciting. So I hope, as you kind of get through, I don't know how many of you are graduating or walking in May, et cetera, but as you kind of go through the next year or so of your studies and life, that you think very, very, very seriously, and I'm saying this in the most sincere way possible, to think seriously about graduate school. This kind of knowledge that you're doing is just, I'm just completely blown away. I mean, I go to these professional conferences with fairly well-known scholars, and the kinds of questions, the critiques, all these things that you're all doing are not kind of there. And and so hearing your voices, I hope that you get as we say, the confianza, the confidence to just kind of keep moving forward, the work on, sexuality, decolonial sexuality, trans, queer of color. I mean, all of the things you're doing, some of this historical archival work to rescue women's voices, queer, it's just super, super important. So I hope you all can think seriously about grad school. And then, if you do think seriously, think about applying to our PhD program. And there's some rock star doctoral students in the audience today, and some of them will be sharing their work later on today. So if you want to talk further about it, just Arturo Aldama, Ethnic Studies, just shoot me an email, and adelante, and just huge kudos. I'm really, really just super, super blown away. So gracias, thank you.
Okay, if we don't have any other questions, and I will look again to make sure there are no hands raised. If we don't have any other questions, I would love to welcome to our stage our poet of the hour, Irena, to share a piece. Take it away, Irena.
Hi, thanks for letting me share a little bit. I have a short poem called Not All Black Boys Are Blue. Yes, there's a who lives on the corner of my street. On my way to the mailbox, he waved at me, his teeth shine like Orbit's gum and make his marble skin shine. I know when the police cars patrol my streets, but sometimes they'll make surprise entrances at 3 in the afternoon instead of 3 in the morning, bored and looking. There's a black boy on the corner of my street. He rides his bike like a speed racer. He uses it to fly above the pavement. He defies gravity. I look around for a curious car, searching for excitement. I breathe a sigh of relief. In this moment, they will not steal his joy. There's a black boy who lives on the corner of my street, and he plays with the other neighborhood kids. I can hear his laughs in the winds, on a mission to show the world that he exists. I do not see him outside once the street lights come on. I can't help but think his mother knows when the police cars patrol our streets too. I look up at the night sky and it looks like him, bright and expansive and black. And I think to myself, not all black boys are blue in the moonlight. Sometimes they are bright and expansive and black, and they don't have to hide when the street lights come on. Thank you. And if any of you are in Colorado Springs tomorrow at 2 p.m., there's a showing of Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye at the Theater Works here at UCCS, and I'll be performing there too and having a talk afterwards. So.
Thank you. And thank you all for being an amazing panel of future rock stars that are going to change the world and that are bringing our attention to the fact that we need to make conscious and purposeful efforts to humanize every individual that we come in contact with, to allow them to be fully accepted, to understand that race is not something that makes us different, to understand that gender or sexuality is not something that makes us different, and that we all need to learn to be more inclusive and accepting of all of the humans that are in this world that we share time and space with. So thank you for your attention, and I will turn it back over to Professor Fay.
Thank you, LeRita, for facilitating that panel. You did such a great job. LeRita is a graduate of the Masters of Social Sciences here at CU Denver with an ethnic studies track. She is also taking our ethnic studies graduate certificate, and as you can see, she is phenomenal. I also wanted to echo everyone's recognition of the amazing research that our undergraduate panelists presented today. Really, I want to echo what Arturo said. This is cutting edge, and I hope that you will all continue on to graduate school and be the future of our discipline. Now we have a lunch break until 1:15. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to end the meeting for now and restart it at 1:15 so that we all get a proper break from our screens. So I will see you all back here at 1:15 for the graduate student research panel. Thank you, everyone.